is she the real lecturer or the teaching assistant? It seemed like a small question, but it carried a much bigger message. As a newly appointed lecturer at 29, I overheard a student asking if I was the real lecturer as I was setting up for class. Now, teaching assistants are absolutely essential to academia, but the assumption behind that question was hard to ignore. At that moment, my heart started beating quicker. The excitement and enthusiasm I felt to deliver my first ever lecture as an academic started to fizzle out. My mind became occupied with what a real lecturer looks like. And more importantly, how do I look like a real lecturer? How do I look like I truly belong at the front of that lecture theater? So, naturally, my next stop was shopping. I filled my wardrobe with darker colors, black, gray, some blues, because I thought that must be what a credible academic looked like. The only problem, it did not feel like me at all. Which is why today, proudly wearing the black and yellow stripes of the Royal Bengal tiger felt so important on the TEDx stage. I later shared this experience with some of my senior female academics, and what they told me really blew my mind. One of them said that she used to wear heels so that she would look taller and be taken more seriously. Another said she would often wear glasses, although she didn't need one, so she could look more intellectual. These were micro-adaptations that we had made in response to questions, comments, assumptions that made us feel like we had to change who we were in order to fit in. They were signals of who was expected to belong and who was not. Micro moments like these can truly make someone feel excluded. And I know this because in my career and in my journey, I have walked into many rooms and many spaces where I did not feel like I belonged, simply because I did not fit the mold. But 7 years on, from that moment in the lecture theater, I am now an associate professor. But even with all of my achievements, one thing I have come to realize is that belonging is something we will always be negotiating, whether we're in our classrooms, our workplaces, our communities, and perhaps even in families. Growing up as a first-generation immigrant, belonging was never automatic. It was something I had to build. I'm a woman of Bengali heritage, belonging to a small ethnic minority group within a vibrant and multicultural society in Singapore. But it was rare to hear my mother tongue being spoken in school. And that made me deeply aware of being different, and at times made belonging feel difficult. But every year, on the 21st of July, we got to celebrate Racial Harmony Day in our schools, where we wore one another's ethnic outfits. I remember friends lining up in front of me from as early as 6 a.m., wanting me to pleat their saris. It takes a skill. And I, in turn, would proudly wear their costumes and their outfits, the Malay baju kabaya, the Chinese cheongsam, to celebrate their cultures. We truly celebrated one another, and we created little spaces of belonging for one another. I often think about how extraordinary that truly was, because no one had formally taught us how to create a sense of belonging. We simply did, by making choices that helped one another feel included. A friend learning how to wear a sari, someone tasting food they've never eaten before, teenagers laughing our heads off because we could not walk gracefully in our traditional outfits. Small moments, but meaningful ones. They made me feel included and reminded me that difference did not have to be a barrier to connection. Perhaps that is why, so many years on, since that moment in the lecture theater, that question stayed with me. Because I had already felt what it was like to belong when people intentionally made space for one another. And these small interactions, they can truly shape someone's sense of belonging or make someone feel like an outsider looking in. And the more you observe and the more you reflect, you'll see these small interactions play out in your everyday life, in everyday conversations. Often so subtle, we barely notice them. Yet so powerful that it shapes how we move through the world. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a room or a space where someone made an assumption about you? Based on how you look, based on how you speak, perhaps you have an accent, or where they think you're from. Maybe you've been told, you don't look like a leader. Or, oh, wow, you are very articulate. You speak such good English. In a way that didn't feel like a compliment. These are moments many of us will recognize. But these moments are never just small. They shape who feels safe enough to speak up, who stays silent, and over time, who feels a sense of belonging. So I thought to myself, if small moments have got the power to create exclusion, then surely small moments can be designed intentionally to create inclusion. And I made it my mission to create these small moments for my students every day. And 2 years back, one of my students confided in me. She said, I have so many classmates, but no real friends. That statement shifted something inside me because it brought me back to my first ever doctoral conference where I was standing at the edges of tightly formed circles, trying to fit in, trying to belong, but completely feeling out of place. I remember calling my parents at the end of that conference, full of tears, telling them that academia was not meant for me. So naturally, I felt strongly about what my student shared. She was looking for connections, but was struggling to build them. So I asked myself, how can we use our creativity to facilitate connection and build a sense of belonging? Not to leave it to chance, but to design it intentionally. That question was the seed that bloomed into the belonging game. My colleagues, who deeply empathized with that student and who themselves walked similar paths, worked together with me to design this game. At its core, this board and card game is a very simple tool that asks you a range of questions, from some really lighthearted, fun, simple ones like, if you were to be a fictional character for a day, who would you be? I always say Kim Possible. She's an ordinary schoolgirl using her courage to make an extraordinary difference in the world. And we have some deeper thinking questions like, what is one thing about your culture that many people do not know? One of my students shared with me that writing someone's name in red ink brings bad luck. So she very seriously advised me never to write love letters in red. So if you have written a love letter in red and never got a response, maybe now you know why. These questions, they create a space for players to share a little bit of their emotions, their lived experience, and more of their authentic selves, perhaps in a way they might not have in a natural or organic setting. And over the past 2 years, this game has been played by over thousands of people across the UK and internationally, in schools, communities, charities, universities, with friends and family. And what we have discovered is something really powerful. When you intentionally create space for people to share who they are, connections form faster than we can imagine. Barriers dissolve and conversations deepen. Micro moments start to become micro spaces of belonging. And when you intentionally design many more of these moments in your everyday life, they start to grow into something much bigger, with the power to influence our wider environment, the people, the culture, the norms, and how people feel within them. That is how you use micro moments of belonging as building blocks for macro change. So, what does this mean for all of us? Perhaps the next time someone walks into a room and quietly questions whether they belong in that space, the answer would not lie in how they change themselves in order to fit in. We can choose to look at belonging differently, not as something people must earn, but as something each and every one of us here has got the power to create for one another in every space we show up in, our classrooms, our workplaces, our communities, our families. It could be as simple as just checking in with someone or validating someone's experience. Keeping an open and curious mind when we meet someone new, especially when they're really different from us, instead of making quick assumptions or judgments. These are small actions, but they really matter. We can be more intentional about creating connections and spaces where people feel comfortable being themselves. Maybe next time, invite someone standing at the edge of the room into the main conversation. Even simpler, let's take our time to learn someone's name and pronounce it correctly, even if it feels difficult or unfamiliar. Because it is these moments and these interactions that make people feel seen, heard, valued, and safe enough to belong. So, why don't you take the next few seconds to turn to one another and share something about yourself that most people would never guess. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for sharing so generously. In just a few short moments, you have managed to create micro spaces of connection with one another. And I hope throughout the rest of the day, you get to create many more of these. With just one simple question, we have managed to fill this theater with laughter and connection. Now, imagine what could happen if we intentionally designed many more of these moments in our everyday lives. Let's not wait for belonging to happen by chance or naturally. Let's design it. Let's be intentional. So, what micro moment of belonging will you choose to create next? Because it is these micro moments that will lead to macro change through the power of belonging. Thank you.